Okay, welcome everyone and happy Wednesday. This is part of Traction Rec's webinar series, and today we have our topic of navigating AI policy, which will actually be a panel with some leaders from across the legal, technology, and nonprofit sectors. So we're pretty excited about a policy webinar, which isn't always easy to say, but one of the reasons we're excited is we heard a lot of requests from our customers and many of the organizations we speak with every day. So there's a lot of interest in this because I think what they're seeing, as we're all seeing, is AI tools are quickly moving from a lot of hype and interest into everyday use. You're seeing a lot of it move from what was probably more personal experimentation into business adoption. And more, I think what we're realizing is even if we're not seeing it, they're being used. So a little bit of what's happening in the shadows versus what's happening out in the sunlight. So I know for the Traction team, we've been doing quite a bit of work around AI with our customers and in the organizations and communities that we work with every day. And we've had some really interesting kind of reflection and data points. One that we've shared before that still top of mind as it was quite recent is we were speaking at a conference earlier this year that had about 150 organizations in the room. And when we asked around AI tool adoption, about over 60% of hands went up. Pretty widespread adoption for their adoption in their business and in their organization. And then when we similarly asked how many of them had policy or guidelines for appropriate use, none of the hands went up. So quite the opportunity it showed. So today, that's why we brought together three different leaders to try and highlight that a little bit for us. This is intended to be some insights and perspectives that will help guide us, whether you're a large organization that has sort of IT and legal resources internally or at Access, or ones who might be smaller, a little bit more lean in their team and don't have access. So it's going to provide some effective tips and tactics for everyone. So to introduce our panelists, let me work across the screen and let me ask each of them to share a little bit about their connection to this topic, and then also our very critical non-AI icebreaker of what is your favorite French fry of choice. So you can choose any fry, but we will offer up that classic curly waffle and tater tot were the popular choices when we surveyed earlier. So Catherine Lake is a partner at Dorsey Whitney legal organization. Catherine, can you share a little bit more for the group about yourself and of course your French fry of choice?
Yes, thank you, Andrew. Let's get the important part out of the way first. I'm definitely team tater tot. Although I really like the sweet potato fries too. So, but tater tot still would be first choice. And great to be a part of this today. I am an IP lawyer partner here at Dorsey and Whitney. My practice is largely focused, sort of split between transactional matters, so negotiating agreements for clients, both on the developer side and the customer side. I get to see it from sort of both sides of things, which is great. And then also more of a traditional trademark and copyright counseling and prosecution practice, which is just fancy legal way of saying that I help clients register and protect their trademarks and copyrights. And in the AI space, I've been doing a lot of agreement work, dusting off existing agreements and doing amendments to add AI terms, looking at new proposals for clients who are interested in using tools, and then also drafting agreements for clients who have new AI tools that they're, including in their mix and want to get out to their customers. So it's been an exciting space and look forward to talking with you all today.
Wonderful. Thanks for joining us, Catherine. Yeah, tater tot is also my favorite, and I hate to tell you, but we had yam on the list, or sweet potato, and we removed it from our suggestion. So maybe you're in a smaller camp there. John Merritt joining us. John's a longtime leader in the nonprofit sector and technology leader. Today he's the SVP and CIO at the YMCA of San Diego. John, tell us a little bit about how you ended up here and, of course, your French fry.
Thanks, Andrew, and good morning, everyone. So I am John Merritt, the CIO here at the YMCA of San Diego County. As a CIO, I see my role in AI as balancing innovation with responsibility, so enabling people to move fast, but do it in a safe way. Like many of you, AI is showing up every day in our world, and we want to find good and responsible ways to really leverage it in the service of what we do. On the French fry side, I'm going to go with Team Tater Tot, and I'm going to tell you why. Because just like AI, tater tots are made up of tiny little bits. They're packed with potential, and if you're not careful, they're going to take over your plate.
Oh,
Andrew.
good answer, John. I keep sharing my own tater tot stories here. In our household, tater tots are top of the list because of tachos, tater tot nachos. So that's what keeps us going. And last but certainly not least, to join us, Jonny Power, the Chief Technology Officer at Traction Rec. He has the unfortunate responsibility of listening to all of my gripes and complaints, the things that I want to do with AI, and he keeps us safe. So, Jonny, tell us a little bit more about how you get here, and of course, your fry.
Yeah, let me start with the more important question, obviously, which is that as a resident of Canada, I have to say poutine. Uh, we have some Montrealers on our team who say that us on the West Coast don't know how to do poutine, but I think it's still pretty good. Um, and then for us, in terms of AI, I started my journey with AI as a little bit of a skeptic to Andrew's great frustration. I just saw it as a probabilistic machine. It doesn't really have rationale or knowledge. But recently, I'd say in the last year with agentic, the great progress there, and especially in terms of development, the development models have got really, really impressive in the last few months. That is starting to get really exciting. You can really start to see the potential opportunity to make us as Traction Rec more efficient, and therefore also enabling the great work the organizations we support do.
Wonderful. I think you kind of cheated there, Jonny, because you upgraded from French fry to a whole dish with poutine, but we'll allow it. All right, let's get into some of the real content and why we're here. So before we get into some policy specific things, maybe just first a little bit around the kind of some of the panelists can share a little bit what they're seeing in AI use in either their organizations or those that they work with and how they're changing. And so, John Merritt, I'll come your direction first. Kind of at the Y from 6 months ago, 12 months ago. Tell us a little bit about how different that's looking.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. Different for sure. So, when I look back like 12 months ago, AI was something that the staff and people were curious about. They were maybe experimenting personally with AI, using it for kind of their own needs, their own purposes. About 6 months ago, it became really clear that AI was really starting to make it into everyday workflows. People were starting to use it for their job and their work. And the challenge or the concern became is that that was happening without any kind of formal approval, no guidelines or guardrails kind of around that. So the next kind of change was policy. So we've developed a formal AI policy that we use here at the Y. We've designated specific tools that are approved, and we've kind of clearly defined uses for AI here at the Y. Also, it's just not about tools; it's also about mindset. So lots of changes here. We've moved from kind of passive observation to being more intentional in our governance and our enablement. We're also, still encouraging creativity and experimentation, and we want to do that in a safe space with our staff. And then kind of the final change, and this is big and more organizational, is that we've focused on creating an organizational AI strategy. So where are we going to go as an organization? How are we going to deliver services, products, and support our communities with AI? And we're doing that through a built-out theory of change and a logic model, which is well aligned with our mission, vision, and values.
And for because being a Y, John, I know a lot of people look to San Diego or just other organizations of what specifically are they looking? Can you speak to what are some of those tools that you've seen kind of come more into the mainstream in your adoption?
Yeah, I think, kind of the tools that staff are using are ways to kind of work smarter, not harder. So, generating documents, analyzing data. So that's kind of what we're seeing internally. From an external perspective, our customers, and this is as we were thinking strategically, our customers have a much higher expectation of rapid service, rapid support, better customer service, easier access to their information. And when you think about how do you deliver that, AI can do that. What are the tools that do that? Agents, bots, and things like that. So lots of work happening, and then lots of change. My team are working daily to build solutions in that space. So that we can do the work of the why better, and then focus on engagement, relations and connections with people. So kind of that promise of AI, kind of removing some of the mundane work so that we can do the more important work.
Okay. Yeah, helpful. Yeah, I know you talked about some of the support agents and stuff for customers. Those internal tools, is it like ChatGPT and things like that? Like, what do you see people gravitating towards?
Yeah, internally, ChatGPT. One of the things that's also happening internally is that we see, kind of the internet, or the public facing GPTs as risky. So the team are looking at how we build out private GPT, so internal GPT that really supports the needs of our staff, in the work that they do, the project teams that they're on. We feed that internal GPT a lot of specific information about us, the work we do, our policies, our practices. That specific tool is even in use to help a very specific call center in the Y help people get access to childcare and get approval for the kind of childcare services that they can get. So it's pretty exciting to see where we're going with that.
Okay, very cool. Catherine, a little bit from the legal side, just maybe at the highest level, like 6 months ago, 12 months ago, 18 months ago, how does it feel like the conversations are changing?
Yeah, so similar to what John was saying, it definitely a year ago, more hesitancy, skepticism, fewer agreements coming across my desk for it, some initial things. But all of that is just speeding up. So I'm seeing more and more proposals, more and more agreements that we're looking at. I will say though too, and keep in mind for this audience, a lot of the clients that I'm working for are, we do some work for nonprofits, but most of them are sort of the bigger companies out there. And there's still, and clients tend to fall into one of two camps: those that have a much greater risk tolerance and who are embracing and sort of moving more quickly in the space, and then clients who are more conservative around risk and maybe would be larger targets for, there are some laws that are now in effect and will be going into effect next year that have very large damages if you're not doing things the right way. And so they're being more cautious with how they approach things. But one thing, and this was sort of, I think John was talking about this too, and you in your introduction, even if entities are not embracing AI officially, the workers and folks within your organization almost certainly are. And so even my clients that are being cautious about it are trying to get policies and things in place, because you don't want it to just be a vacuum. You then have the risk without having considered it. And so something is probably better than nothing in that space.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Catherine. I'll take that and go a little bit into like sort of what are some of those inflection points as people think about their own profiles and organization. Maybe just before we do, Holly and our marketing team, I think we have a quick poll of just kind of where people are at, just to get a bit of sense of this group in terms of how it's being governed today. And so we should have a quick poll coming up that'll just provide some options of, do you have something in place? Do you have a formal policy? Do you have general guidelines? Are we nothing yet, and but just starting to creep into it? So we'll give people a minute to answer those questions. Right. feel like in the past I've been able to see the poll results. So I don't know if it's working and it's happening, but maybe we'll just need people to put their answers in chat. While we'll see if those results will come up. Jonny Power. Oh, here we go. Sorry. So I try and figure out what's happening here. Poor facilitation, Andrew. Okay, we got a little bit of a snapshot here. So let's see. So 44% fall into that category of nothing regulated and a bit of free tool use right now, which is a bit of an improvement on some of the numbers we might have felt we saw when we were doing a few months ago, but still almost in the majority of almost 50%. So, and then we see a bit of a movement there in kind of informal guidelines. So Jonny Power, going to come to you next. So when we think about for organizations, what becomes that urgency or that inflection point for them of really leaning into this and starting to develop policy? Can you share a little bit about on the Traction Rec side, what were some of the things that might have triggered that for us?
Yeah, so I mean, pretty early on in, hey, AI's here, we put a policy in place, and I think the way John Merritt described it as making room for experimentation is a really important part of the policy for us. So when we designed our policy, we based it on what data is being entered into the tools. So if you review tools like ChatGPT and other LLM providers, you'll find that when you have a commercial relationship with those providers, the way they manage data is much more compatible with your business. So that's a big plus for us. So we then knew that, hey, we've reviewed the terms and conditions of these tools we want to use through our vendor approval process. We know that when we have a commercial relationship with them, there's going to be good data governance that we have good trust and belief in. So then it becomes, hey, if you're using any data that falls into these categories, you must use an approved tool. But if you're using publicly available data that's not commercially sensitive or sensitive for our customers in any way, then you can use your own tools, and that allows for experimentation. So we built our policy very much around that belief.
Yeah, and then in addition to that, Jonny, I'm thinking there's probably also some pretty hard rules internally, like as a SOC 2 compliant organization, it feels like I don't really know what was happening, but that seemed to come into effect a lot from an internal perspective.
Yeah, so we were writing a lot of policies at that time anyway, because we were going through our first SOC 2 audit, and it requires a lot of policy documentation. So it made sense to write our generative AI policy at the same time. Although that is not currently a SOC 2 control, it probably should be. And it probably will be coming soon. So I'm glad we already have the policy in place.
I see Catherine nodding, so she's like, yes, that is probably the likely path there.
By February of next year, if I was going to guess.
Sorry, what was that, Catherine? February of next year?
I just was saying by the Colorado law, which is sort of the forefront, will be effective February of next year and requires all sorts of internal management, particularly for agentic AI. And so I would imagine the organizations that do SOC and NIST, all of these things will be updating in the next few months there, what's going to be required.
Okay, very helpful. John Merritt, I wonder if you can translate a little bit from Jonny Power. So, you know, as a partner to many YMCAs, JCCs, Boys and Girls Clubs, we're thinking about our customers and our customers' data, and then some of where the sensitivity is. How are you providing for this audience a little bit? What are some of the examples of data where you're like, hey, this falls in that category where we consider, you know, quite sensitive and people should be mindful around that use, versus where do you have a bit more flexibility and that opportunity for experimentation?
Yeah, that's a great question, Andrew. So, I mean, kind of this inflection point or the sense of urgency around data and AI and how it was being used. We kind of saw a tipping point with staff. Staff started asking about using sensitive and internal content, you know, as it related to AI. So that's kind of how it really showed up for us. You know, they wanted to do analysis, they wanted to do reporting, you know, they wanted to look at YMCA sensitive information and see what AI could tell them about that. And that's when we kind of realized that we couldn't leave this up to chance, at that point. And something that I mentioned earlier, at the same time, we were focused on experimenting and building out kind of a private GPT, this kind of safe space where, policy in place, we're working, more towards training where staff could then take the questions they have or the things they wanted to build or the data that they wanted to use in kind of partnership with IT. So we helped kind of create the data sets that would be used in this private GPT, and then bringing that to the staff. It helped align AI with the internal work. It does reduce risk. There's always risk even with internal private GPT. But then that created the opportunity for staff to kind of take the ideas and get connected to a tool. I mentioned a little bit earlier, so also having agent force. So, we are a Salesforce traction rec shop. So the work that we're doing around agentic solutions to deliver customer service, we're doing those in partnership with our staff. We're talking with them. We're talking with leadership and management so that they have this awareness around this work, and they know that the solutions that we're working towards delivering will be safe, and they will be monitored and they will be managed. And there's a lot of excitement around that because the staff see this opportunity to kind of streamline things like case management. The focus is on trying to surface real-time insights in our data. WISE collect a lot of data. We have a lot of programmatic and fundraising and community-based service-related data. What can we learn from that so that we can do better, serve better, bring more people into the Y to help meet their needs. So that's kind of the cool thing going on the agent force side right there. But so I think that really by investing in AI solutions aligned with mission and values, what we're trying to do is demonstrate, what responsible AI use looks like. Model that for the staff, and even in some way, as it really it hasn't quite reached our customers yet, but as it does, so that they see it. And we're using these projects, to also model governance and safety. So, as we work with, building our private GPT, or as the team work with building out agentic solutions with Salesforce, we're modeling, how we're safe. We're measuring, what the results are. We're looking at, the data that are going into those systems to ensure that we're, putting the proper protections in place. And then, we do as an organization have a commitment to build AI tools and empower staff because we want staff to feel like AI is accessible and not intimidating. I remember kind of those early days, staff were very worried. Is AI going to take my job? Is AI going to replace me? And I don't know that that's true at this point. I mean, maybe someday. I'd like to have an AI copy of myself so I can go surf. But I think that, really trying to help staff see how it enhances the work and frees them up to do the things that are more focused on mission, vision, and value.
Yeah, very helpful perspective. I'm going to take that and move a little bit more into, so if you are one of those orgs and you're in the 44% who we have nothing today in this session, and you're thinking, hey, okay, I'm seeing profile where, yeah, there's a lot, we're a community center, we're a Y, whichever, we got lots of data that could be considered very sensitive. We also maybe have some of our own compliance. Maybe it's around child safety and Presidium accreditation, whichever it is, things that we want to be mindful of. So we want to get started. So Catherine, lawyers hate this question, but what is the least amount we could do legally to cover ourselves to get started with policy?
Yeah, and you're right. We do hate the question because there's not going to be a blanket answer for everyone, but I think that in the least, you should be taking a look at, and this is our, Jonny and John have already commented on this, but how you're using data is probably right now the biggest concern with, at least for organizations like yours. And so having a policy in place that addresses this is what data is okay to use in these tools versus other tools out here. And as John has mentioned, you're going to lower your risk by having commercial policy. Generally speaking, you're going to have less risk if you have a commercial agreement in place and you're using a private or a closed system rather than the public GPT or public Claude or whatever else is going on. And all of this is on a case-by-case basis. I mean, when I'm, I'm putting together a different presentation, and I've been creating crazy graphics using public stuff because I don't care if that, system trains itself on those and takes my works and does whatever it wants with them. But if I'm doing anything for a client, that data I have to keep it confidential. I have to be very concerned with what is happening with it. And so I'm not going to put any of that in a public system. And, as a firm, we have a policy and we want our employees to understand that you shouldn't be using the systems for that. So in the very least, I think having that kind of policy in place, it can be a pretty simple policy that goes out to your customers. And then making sure that I think the second thing is making sure that this is a part of your vendor management process, because there definitely are risks, and you lower those risks by having a commercial agreement in some respects, but you may be taking on much, different risks, and you want to understand what those are, what the vendor is accepting for risk versus what they're expecting the organization or the customer to take on. And we're very much in an unsettled place as far as that goes. It's not like, IP infringement, where when I started practicing many, many moons ago, that was fairly unsettled. These days, those terms are pretty, standard and accepted across organizations. But AI risk is certainly in flux. And so it's a matter of looking at that, making sure it's part of the vendor management process, and then also keeping in mind as part of that you should be looking at your insurance. So as you are taking on or starting to use more tools, and even if you think you're not using tools, again, the folks within your organization are using them. So make sure you're dusting off your insurance policies and talking to your brokers and making sure that you have at least minimal coverage for these things.
Yeah. Okay. So you kind of reiterated, as Jonny said, commercial terms. So basically, if you pay for it, then usually often you have the opportunity to switch off the data training, and that helps, I think, a bit to John's point of making it a private environment. That's one of the simplest paths a lot of the times, and more available just generally. Catherine, you also talked about just understanding the nature of data. I thought you provided a great example for yourself. And so, Jonny Power, maybe I'll ask if you have any tips for this group, because I'm thinking, like, if you're one of our community centers that we work with, if I'm putting together a marketing description for our camp program, not very sensitive. That's going broadly publicly available, things like that. If I'm putting together a personalized solicitation to a donor that might include information about them, their families, things like that, could be, very personal. It could be sensitive data as well too. So, Jonny, with that in mind, like that idea of like, okay, go look at all your data and figure out what's sensitive or not, is good advice, and it's also a big task. So how do you start to approach something like that?
Yeah, so if you don't already have like a data classification framework in place and you're doing it ad hoc, that would be tricky, because you're going to have to put a lot of trust in people's assessment of that risk when they don't have the necessary knowledge. So I'd first say, like, put data categories in place that everyone can understand. Public information, like you say, hey, if this is going to be part of a brochure that is going to be publicly available, very obvious that that's likely safe. As soon as you get into like personally identifiable information, health information, financial information, proprietary, like intellectual property, data that's been provided to you, and you are the custodian of that data, so you have significant responsibilities in how that's categorized. That's like, those are the sorts of the levels you would think about. So for us, we have 3 tiers of data. We have public, we have restricted, and we have confidential. And for us, for instance, data we are trusted to be custodians of is considered extremely sensitive. So regardless of our AI policy, we should still, even if we do have a commercial agreement with AI vendors, we still cannot enter customer data into AI tools, for instance. Does that help?
Yeah. Helpful, I think, in sort of opening up the where you start a little bit. So I'll be curious what people are in terms of where they're looking for guidance coming out of this, if that's one of the areas. John Merritt, I'm thinking from what Jonny's describing, he's describing a lot of too of just how you educate and kind of enable staff, and especially non-technical staff, operational staff. What are some approaches that you guys have done at the Y of how do you make people care about data and understand maybe more technical definitions and things like that, so when they are the custodians, as Jonny says, they understand their role and responsibility?
Yeah, that is a great and challenging question, Andrew. I think that the key is to speak their language, speak the staff's language. Most people don't care about model architectures or token limits. They care about, am I going to get in trouble if I do this? Can I trust what this thing gives me? So I think that from a policy perspective, we focused on real scenario, actual scenarios, things that that staff may do every day. Writing job descriptions, summarizing reports, creating outreach emails, newsletters, and things like that. So we tried to bring the reality of what they're going to do and then marry that to AI to let them kind of, see, that they could get some positive results there. And at the same time, it's giving simple rules. It's making, rules that people can follow. Don't share or use confidential data. Always review AI results because we know that hallucinations are real. Labeling AI generated content, I think, is also an important component there. And I think that's what's cool is that this, doing this kind of built trust. And we, from a policy perspective, we emphasized that policies weren't about punishment. It was more about empowerment, protection, ethical use, and innovation. So, policy as guideline, but also at the same time trying to create freedom. On the data protection side, the interesting thing that's evolving for us is kind of more traditional data governance. This component hasn't been very active for us. So there is a group that's actually spun up to manage data classification and ownership, and then talk about use of that data. I do kind of have a dream and a vision where kind of data ownership is real because data is more owned by our operations folks, and then IT's job is to keep that data safe. And then how do we do those things together and in partnership?
Okay, very helpful. Always, I guess anytime you're working with the business and operations from the technology team, there's that balance between empowerment, responsibility, and not trying to feel like there's restrictions when you're trying to implement whether, process or procedure. I think we can probably go a bit from there, a little bit from between policy and guidance, because there's a bit of an overlap there. Maybe just before we do, I see there's a question in the chat that, John, I think is for you specifically, as you talked about some of these private GPTs. So a bit of a tactical question on what are you using to make a GPT private, and really kind of control those data sources?
Yeah, we're using Azure AI Playgrounds, and all the components associated to build out the GPT there.
Yeah,
Oh,
jump into that one a little bit too, Andrew.
yeah.
So like methodologies have changed. Like this is a very innovative space. It's changing all the time. Initially, when, for instance, ChatGPT came out and it offered fine tuning, a way people tried to bake intelligence into those models was fine tuning the model with your data. That I think is a more complex data management in terms of who owns that and what the consequences of that are. But there's better alternative paths now that actually provide better results. So architecture built around like RAG instead, where you have a commercial agreement with the model. You, at the point in time of making a query or request, you find relevant documents, you provide that to the LLM in the prompt, and then you trust that the commercial agreements in place make sure that that prompt data is not being used for training. That kind of difference in architecture provides a better protection of your data. So it is important to think through the methodologies a little bit in terms of that too.
Okay. And so similarly on this idea of, hey, it's a quick moving space, and even 3 months can produce a lot of change in how you might approach something. So kind of therein lies the challenge of policy. We write policy today, and in 3 or 6 months, the policy is maybe a little less relevant or a little less accurate than it needed to be. So policy versus guidance. How do how do we kind of marry the two? How do we think of them, especially in this kind of rapidly changing space? And this one I'll just broadly open to whoever feels the most interested.
I can start on that. I mean, I think that all of this, it's important to understand it's not going to be a one and done sort of situation, and particularly not where you're going to write a policy, send it out to your organization, and then put it away and nobody really has to think about it again. Or not, maybe you don't have to think about it again for another year or 5 years or something. This is a policy and guidance that needs to be just part of almost the daily fabric of what you're doing, because things change and your organization, your staff is going to need to be reminded of things. I mean, for instance, I have a client where I'm working with their vendor management team, and a few months ago, they started using an AI to do summaries of internal discussions that they were having. And this is kind of a pointer on a couple of notes. One is on, your data, when you're thinking of how your data is being used, and you're thinking of, oh, we've got a tool that can summarize internal discussions. What level of data is at issue there? And it's probably everything, because who knows what may come up in those discussions. So it can be a little bit tricky that way, but I started getting these emails from them with, unbeknownst to me, AI summaries of conversations that we're having. So I was asking, I was looking at an agreement and asking them very specific questions. How does the business want to respond to this? Is 30 days okay to pay on this? Do you want to push to your standard 45? And I started noticing I was getting really strange answers back on things. Not something where I was like, well, that's clearly wrong, but just it was maybe phrased in a way that was odd, or where there were inconsistencies, where it had given an answer on, the third question, and then the answer on the sixth question contradicted what had come before, even on something like, so are you going to use sensitive information with this tool? And so initially I was just sending emails back to them saying, hey, I need some more clarification around this. And finally I had a conversation with one of them where they told me what they were doing. And so then it was a matter of reminding them and going to their higher ups to say, hey, you want to make sure and John made this point earlier, that you're reiterating with them, you have to check everything that the AI is doing, because it will do the hallucinations. If you're using agentic, it's going to have biases. I mean, people have biases. It's no great surprise that the things we create also have biases. The agentic AI is capable of taking independent action that you may not want it to take. So, knowing what the risks are, but then also just making sure that you're reviewing things and you're double checking them. And these are tools, they're not replacements, which again, I think is helpful to giving people comfort that they're not taking over everyone's job. They're just adding, hopefully a tool so that you can spend more time surfing or whatever you want to be doing. So I think it's the implementing, making sure you're thinking it through, getting the policies in place, but then making that just a part of daily, and these increasingly will become a part of daily life. I mean, again, I've been doing this long enough that I remember when Outlook, email was first a tool and things had to change for that. Policies had to be put in place. And, within a few years, these tools will be similar to the way we use. We all remember when Zoom first became something, and there needed to be policies in place for that because people were doing people things with it. So it's just a matter of recognizing this is here to stay, and it's something that, you know, we've got to get our arms around and just make it into the fabric of operations.
Right. There's some of the uncertainty is representative of like the maturity stage, and that there are lots of unknowns. So you almost have to find a bit of comfort or understanding in that, in how you approach it as well too, and know that I guess the example you used is like when it's like, hey, this employee is probably tripping up a little bit here and how they're using the tools, and you got to share with some leadership of this isn't really probably how you want to be used. And I think a bit of John's point before of you're not trying to like slap hands or anything like that, but it's just gently guiding them back to hey, this is in the stream of how we want to responsibly use technology.
You know, if I could, Andrew, I think, I don't know if it's policy versus guidance, or is it policy and guidance? I think policy has to exist. Policy is the kind of the standard plan for how we work, how we use AI, you know, the accepted tools, you know, how we kind of manage this new, you know, technological gift in our world. I think guidance is how we work with each other to use that well alongside the policy. I mean, just a couple of, you know, examples kind of in that space. You know, staff, I remember one of our staff coming to us wanting to use, you know, GPT to create a newsletter, you know, YMCA newsletters for, you know, any number of things. So that was like a guidance moment right there. That was that moment where we could kind of pull out the policy, you know, walk through it. What are they trying to do? You know, look at the use case. In this particular case, you know, it was public facing. It didn't contain personal data. I mean, ChatGPT was more than appropriate to help them, you know, in that work right there. But if you kind of look at it from a different perspective, or on the flip side, you know, staff have asked us about, you know, uploading incident reports, which contain all kinds of information, PI, PII, even HIPAA information sometimes, because they wanted to do analysis or editing or review of that, you know, leveraging AI. And probably not a great use right there. But, you know, again, the guidance, you know, component kind of pops up then. You know, the policy is there to kind of, you know, hold us steady. You know, that's how we keep the course, you know, and operate in a standard way. So we use kind of a scenario-based coaching around our AI policy. You know, so you know, we want staff to kind of bring their ideas. We talk through what they want to do. Guidance, and then policy, you know, helps determine whether it's kind of a red light, green light. But again, also encouraging them to really lean into this tool. So there's that, and then there's always kind of the ongoing world of, you know, the practical tips, and we've talked about this already today. You know, never input personal or confidential information is always a discussion point or a guidance component. You know, always review the generated content, and then always or only, you know, use the approved tools. And I think the cool thing is that policies are kind of living documents to a degree. So while tools are outlined in our policy, we know that tools are going to change over time. You know, more things are going to pop up, and, you know, staff are going to bring them to our attention, and we're going to review and find ways to kind of make that happen. So I think it's policy plus guidance, but it starts with policy. You got to have that standard component there.
Yeah, that's it's almost like you need the rules for the game before you have a referee, you know?
Yeah.
So having a bit of that foundation. John, you're just saying a little bit about tools. I'm going to loop back to something that you said and Jonny both said, and maybe even Catherine hit us too, just that idea of approved vendors, or, you know, trusted vendors, things like that. And so John, you mentioned you guys, one of the tool sets you work with is Agentforce from Salesforce. And so Salesforce already an existing vendor, so an approved vendor or approved partnership already in a way. How should organizations approach who should be in their good list kind of thing, when you're trying to give some of those determinations or guidelines?
I'm going to let Jonny start that one.
Yeah, Jonny does have some opinions on this one. So
Absolutely.
Yeah, sure. So it's not as hard as it sounds, in my opinion. What you need to do is, well, there's a few big providers, right? So pick one that you want to start with, review how they treat your data and what their policy and terms are around training of their models with data you provide them. So for instance, ChatGPT, OpenAI, data that they obtain via API is not used to train models. There's a lot of confusion about this. If you read discussion forums, people are convinced that OpenAI are using API obtained data to train their models. Read their policy, read their terms. If that gives you confidence, great. You should consider making that an approved vendor. You would work through that similar process for all your AI approved vendors. The other tricky part that's a little bit more difficult, which is maybe a little bit more optional, but this is what we do as well every year. When we go through our vendor review for all vendors, not just AI vendors, we figure out from their terms and their policy how that company is also using generative AI. Because we also want to be confident that any vendor we have a commercial relationship with also has a responsible policy around how they're using AI themselves. We don't want data we provide to a vendor that isn't even an AI vendor, like say our HRIS system, then using AI irresponsibly. So that's another part of it too. It's a little bit more difficult, a little bit more time consuming, but getting started with pick a vendor and review their terms and their commercial terms and see how comfortable you are with that.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. So the same way that we kind of hold ourselves to the standard of how we would treat our customers' data, we want our data to be treated as a customer as well too. Jonny, like, is it also, should it be getting a bit easier? Like, I feel like I'm noticing just as a user, like those approved tools, like they're pretty explicit about they're not using your data. You know, like when I'm in ChatGPT, in that commercial license, it says right there, ChatGPT may hallucinate and we're not using your data to train our model. Like, is that becoming a bit more of the expectation for those that are in that kind of best acting or in that category?
Yeah, I think that makes sense, right? Like as a business, it's impossible to use a tool if they're gonna use your data for training models. Like that's really just a blocker, and they know that that's going to be a big problem. So they are trying to counter the narrative that is happening by making things like that a lot clearer.
Right. Yeah, it seems like that's been one of the bigger shifts. Catherine, I think you're going to add something there.
Yeah. So again, in the commercial terms, and then just as a practice point on that, and I would encourage you all to bake this into your policies. Keep in mind that a lot of these platforms are gateways. So if you're using Google, your Google terms govern some things, but not other things. If you go into the model garden, it's the wild, everything you click on is subject to separate terms, essentially. It might be a separate vendor's terms, might be, a third party, it might be separate Google terms. So just because you have they're not making it as easy for customers as one would perhaps hope. And there's good reasons for that from the platform side of things, but it is important to recognize that, if you're in Azure, but you're going into the marketplace, you're now entering into a different agreement with a different vendor, and you have to check those terms as well as the Microsoft terms that apply. So it's a little bit of making sure that your developer folks or whoever it is who can access things understand that and are taking the appropriate precautions. But I agree with Jonny. I think that that's one thing that there was a lot of questions around, really even 18 months ago, can we use our customers' data to train? And that's becoming more settled on the commercial front. But where I'm seeing a lot of pushback these days, at least in standard, even commercial terms, is whether the vendor wants to take any responsibility for what happens with their tool. And, this is a risk allocation issue, and each organization is going to have a different appetite for how much risk it's willing to take on. I've seen contracts where vendors are unwilling to even agree that their tool will comply with laws, which is somewhat understandable because there's a lot of laws coming into effect, and they may not be able to comply with them. But then you as a user have to assess what could that mean for us, because the states, and this is all almost entirely, at least in the US, on the state level so far, They will be looking, once these laws become effective, they will be looking to take some actions and make, cases and most, I mean, you all are in a decent space because generally the nonprofits are not the poster children that states want to be going after for these things. But there is always some risk around how you're doing it. And just to realize too, you can negotiate. If you're getting those standard terms, even as a small organization, you may not be spending a lot of money, but pushing back and trying to get something that is more reasonable, or a more reasonable allocation of risk is entirely appropriate.
Yeah, Catherine, you reminded me too. One thing we were going to touch on when we were just thinking about the today was the regional considerations. So joining us today, we not just have people from many different states where you see a lot of regional considerations. We also have people from US and Canada. It's I mean, that's probably how long is a piece of string, but any again, high level guidance on how to approach that as an organization.
I mean, you've got to know which laws are, governing your use. And there's the high level things I can point out. Canada has much better, more restrictive, depends on how you're looking at it, laws around data protection and consumer protections than a lot of areas of the United States do. And then there are places where the US has for instance, whether outputs are subject to or can be protected by intellectual property laws. The US, at least so far, is very clear that they're not protected. You have to have only human created content, inventions, whatever is something that can be protected by copyright or patent. Canada has not yet issued any sort of definitive ruling on that, but it's looking like they're going to follow the same kind of course. So there will be variations as these things work through. There's going to be variations state by state. And in a similar way, I think, to the way data privacy has evolved in the US, there end up being, we generally look to California on the data privacy front because they've tended to be the most restrictive, but that's not quite the case so far in AI. Again, Colorado, I think, is still the cutting edge of this as far as states go. So it's just paying attention to that. And then, that kind of becomes the default for everybody else, really, because if you have to comply with one, you may as well comply with the most whatever's the most rigorous.
Right. Okay. Thank you. I know it's a hard question to answer succinctly. So we're almost at time. We have one more poll question we'll put up, and then we'll come back to each of the panelists to provide us a bit of a takeaway. But one of the things that we've been working on as part of this webinar as well too is there any assets that we can provide to attendees that might help them get started? So give us a little feedback. We've had some specific asks for some of these already, and some of them kind of are in development. And I know, hey, in our customer base, one of the things they do the best is share resources and knowledge. So great opportunity here, as you say. There's lots changing. There's lots we can look to as if they're already out in front of this and starting, that could be a bit of the model. So we'll get that feedback, and then we'll come to our panelists. And in the last few minutes we have, if you're going to provide one practical thing attendees can do this week to move forward on responsible AI use, keeping in mind that almost 45% of people don't have any policy today, what would be your one tactical, tangible takeaway of going forward? All right, let's wait for these poll results where our panelists think of their insightful knowledge that they're going to depart. Okay. Examples and step-by-step starter kit. I think those are the two leading ones. So, and most people looking for examples. So, John Merritt, I think you already generously have offered to sort of share what the YMCA of San Diego has done in terms of a policy. I know the Traction Rec team, we're very happy to share our resources as well too. So those will give a couple flavors, and we'll start sharing those out as takeaways as well too. So with that though, let me work from from first Catherine, I'll go to you, then John Merritt, then to Jonny. What is your one tip for the audience? Something they can do this week, and it's Wednesday, so they only have like 2 days to do it.
So I would say, and this is really going more to the group that hasn't done much of anything in this space, just, organize, have a coffee or a, lunch or something with someone in your team who you suspect is either already using AI or who would be interested in these things, and just begin the conversation. Talk to them about, are they using it? How are they using it? How would they like to be using it? Just start talking about it. And I think that will help inform you of what your next step should be after that.
Love that. These organizations all have amazing people. So you're right. Get some good heads together and that will start it. John Merritt, what can people do?
Yeah, Catherine, that's a great point. I'm going to sound a lot like that. I mean, basically, don't wait to feel ready. Just start. Create a safe space for conversation. Grab those team members that are out there, bring a few of them together. Just spend 30 minutes reviewing how AI is currently being used, because as was shared by this group earlier, it's already out there. Staff are already using it every day. So do those reviews, ask questions like, are we using the right tools? Are we protecting sensitive information? Are we checking for accuracy? I think that simple discussion can really uncover risk. I think it can surface opportunities, and maybe even spark a lightweight policy. Out of that discussion, you can kind of start that, that building of a policy that can help you. And just a little bit more on that, I think also a lot of not-for-profits do have access to volunteers who may have an expertise. Tap into those experts, bring them into that discussion, and maybe they can even assist with that kind of first round policy. And I think more importantly, it really helps to build a culture of curiosity and responsibility by just kind of keeping the doors open and the conversation flowing around the topic.
Excellent. Love it, John. You're right. Create a safe space, bring it out of the shadows into the light a little bit, so people feel comfortable. And you're right. All of your organizations that are here today, they have amazing volunteers. They have amazing lay leaders, board members, things like that, who also want to help in this space. That's what they're there for. So using them. All right, Jonny Power, no pressure, but bring us home with a really good one.
So listen, if you have no policy in place and no governance covering this, you got to get started. And it's not as hard as it sounds, right? Open a Word doc, put generative AI policy as the header, and just get started. It can be 1 or 2 pages. It doesn't have to be a dramatic 40-page document, right? You just got to get something in place that governs your organization. People are using these tools, and if you don't have the policy in place, you're just not set up for success. And it's very easy to get started, so just get started.
I like it. Just get started. You're gonna have samples from the YMCA of San Diego and probably from Traction Rec. So that's California and Canada, which I heard Catherine say are basically the most strict. So you're already starting at the top. So if you start with that, hopefully you got a bit of tools to get off on the right foot. So thank you very much to all of our panelists for taking some time and sharing some insights about what you're seeing in your organizations, and then lots of tips for people about what they can do too. It's an exciting, little scary, but fast moving space nonetheless. So this is all really valuable. And thank you everyone for attending today. We'll see you all again soon.
Thank you.
Thanks.